morning. I'm Dr. Stites, Chief Medical Officer here at the University of Kansas Health System. Welcome back to Open Mics with Dr. Stites. You sometimes hear us use the phrase academic medicine. On one hand, that means the next generation of physicians and scientists who come here to train under the guidance of expert professionals. But academic medicine means much more. It means research. There are thousands of people at both the KU Health System and the University of Kansas Medical Center who are devoted to discovery, trying to find the causes and cures for disease or studying ways to improve patient care. A lot of that research goes on behind the scenes. But you might not benefit from it. But you might benefit from it even if you've never set foot inside our health system. And here's the really neat thing. Research at the University of Kansas Medical Center has exploded in growth, not just in the past 10 to 20 years, but even in the past 5 years. Today, we're meeting some of the people who are leading the amazing research happening at KUMC, or as I like to say, KU Med, and asking how it benefits patients, the community, and possibly even people everywhere. But first, let's do our morning rounds. Two recent votes from the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, will let our cancer patients get new cellular therapies much sooner. You've heard us talk before about CAR T immunotherapy for certain blood cancers. Up until now, they've been used as last-ditch treatments when cancer comes back after multiple other therapies. But last week, the FDA's Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee, they're actually really important. It sounds like a lot of words, but that's a pretty cool group because they really look hard at all the studies that are coming out. They agreed that 2 CAR T therapies can be used sooner. We're talking again, that sounds bad. He's back again on our program.
Thank you.
Dr. Al-Ola Abdallah, a hematologist and an oncologist at the University of Kansas Cancer Center. He is also the director of the Plasma Cell Disorder Clinic and the chair of the United States Myeloma Innovations Research Collaborative. Dr. Abdallah, I know this is the news you have been waiting for. Tell us a little bit about the CAR Ts that were voted on and what do they treat and what does this mean?
Well, it's really actually a very important news, for a lot of people to understand that these 2 CAR T cells for relapsed myeloma have been approved back in 2021 and 2022, as all of you know, for very late relapsed myeloma, as you said. And we were looking forward for this actually, public hearing from the ODAC, for voting. And the voting was about, are these 2 CAR T cells, the ide-cel and cilta-cel, ready to move a little bit forward in earlier relapsed myeloma? And they look at the efficacy and safety based on 2 randomized trials. The voting was actually in favor to move that, up front and, earlier relapse, which means that the FDA will hopefully finalize that recommendation and decide exactly if they're going to be in the first or second relapse of myeloma. That's a really important and exciting news after, for the oncology community as well also for the myeloma community.
So this is a big deal. Talk to us about how the FDA got convinced that what had been last-ditch but very successful therapies could be used much earlier.
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, for a lot of us to know that back in 2021 and 2022, these 2 trials that we have was only single-arm studies, and the 2 CAR T cells shows really efficacy in patients who relapse, multiple times. And now the 2 studies were actually to compare CAR T cell versus a standard of care, which is a combination therapy. And not only it shows there is an efficacy, but also, it's a safety thing, which with quality of life. These patients receive only 1 treatment, and that is for the rest of their life if they stay in remission, comparing to the standard of care that the patients have to continue to be on treatment in order to keep them in remission. So the FDA kind of look at all these aspects. Not only there is an efficacy for the CAR T cell that favored both of them, but there was also a quality of life, which was also very considered for all our myeloma patients. So it was a really good, great decisions by the FDA based on these 2 randomized trials.
So it's not only that they live longer, they live better. Sounds like a pretty good thing. So when does it become frontline therapy or first-line therapy? Will we see that day?
Well, we were hoping to see that. We have to understand we just need more randomized clinical trials for that to prove it's better than the standard of care, which is stem cell transplant. Gladly that KU have 2 major trials for transplant eligible and non-eligible to provide it as a randomized trial and compare it to CAR T cell. We're hoping that this will be the next big thing, to change the standard of care and the landscape of myeloma in the future. It will take years to know that because we have really great options of therapy, but also, again, we want the best quality of treatment and the quality of life for our myeloma patients. So hopefully that we will hear it soon.
You know, that is really great news, and we appreciate your being here today. Congratulations on that. Congratulations on your leadership, the research you're doing. So thanks, thank you so much. That kind of breakthrough, using human immune cells to kill cancer, is just one example of how decades of research can lead to meaningful change. Earlier I said that research at the University of Kansas Medical Center is exploding. Let's take a look at those numbers. In fiscal year 2023, federally funded research at KUMC reached over $120 million for 1 year. That's an all-time high. When you add in donations from private sources and other types of governmental grants, total research spending reached $180 million for 1 year. That's a 50% jump since fiscal year 2019. Here's a graph showing NIH awards just at the School of Medicine. Okay, this is the kind of graph we like to see. We saw this in COVID, it was numbers going up. We didn't like that. We see this in research, and we're like, yeah, that is a great looking graph. So back in 2006, we had under $40 million. Those numbers stayed roughly the same until 2018, but then it shoots up to more than $100 million in 2023. That prompts a lot of questions like, what changed? What happens with that money? What kind of things are we discovering? What's going on at the University of Kansas Medical Center that's so cool? Let's ask my guest today. Dr. Robert Samari, a very good friend of mine, happens to be the Executive Vice Chancellor of the KU Medical Center and a large part responsible for many of the changes we're seeing on some of those graphs. Dr. Peter Smith is the Senior Associate Vice Chancellor for Research as well as the Senior Associate Dean for Research at the KU School of Medicine. That is a lot of words, Peter Smith. I've known Peter Smith for a very long time, also a fellow nerd and fly fisherman. And Peter has had a lot behind those great graphs. And Dr. Jacob Sosnoff is the Associate Dean of Research for the KU School of Health Professions. You're newer to the block.
Well, 3 years in.
Oh, that's okay. That's still relatively new to some of us old guys, but you brought a lot to this place. We're very glad you're all here. Dr. Samari, total research spending reached $180 million in fiscal year 23. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think the three of us, your three guests today, really represent three different time frames of our advancement. You and Peter go back the longest and can speak to the
thank you for that
20 years in forward. I came in 2014, 10 years ago, and worked closely with Peter and you on that time frame. And then Jacob represents really an advancement of research in the other schools, in the School of Health Professions. So what happened 20 years ago that was important, I think came out of the vision of Dr. Atkinson, who said, we are going to have a federally sponsored, NCI-sponsored cancer center here on this campus. And she was focused and she was clear about that. Peter, that was only partially well received on this campus at the time. If I understand my history, that was a little controversial.
There was some apprehension. We were told that we were all going to be cancer biologists, and we tried to figure out how that worked. But the vision was sound. And it takes a while to make it happen, but in the end, we are the beneficiaries of a fantastic cancer center now that is driving other research forward.
So in 2004, the recruitment of Roy Jensen also happened to be the year that we recruited Jeff Burns here to start an Alzheimer's disease center. And a focus was they started awarding Centers for Translational Sciences. And so those three things, Alzheimer's, cancer, and the CTSA, really were the underpinnings that were present when I got here in 14. And then when I got here in 14, working with you and Peter, we kind of changed slowly the culture about how we value research on campus. And with the those three pillars getting funded and aligning dollars with purpose, this is what happened. And while Peter and I, and actually, you know, Steve, you were directly involved with the aligning finances with purpose. It took us a few years, and you can see what happened in 18.
Yeah, I think that made all the difference.
Made all the difference. It was a change of culture based upon Dr. Atkinson's clear commitment, and it was, like I said, was controversial. But it's not just been limited to the School of Medicine. I know Jake represents School of Health Professions, which has been. It's the same curve. It's just lower numbers.
It's a little number, and maybe just a slight. So, Dr. Samari, your research has been funded by the NIH. Let's say it more than 35 years now.
Holy cow.
That's all.
Yeah,
You know what that means?
yeah.
It means you're old.
So,
So help our audience understand what's more from that age. Why does that matter?
Yeah, so it's said that research is like running research is like running a symphony. When you run a symphony, you have to have ticket holders and you have to have benefactors. And the ticket holders judge the value of the symphony on a day-to-day basis. The benefactors support it in the lean years. For us, the NIH are the ticket holders. They judge the quality on a day-to-day basis and only support the best and the brightest. Our supporters are also like the supporters of a symphony. We need them to keep things going, hard times, take other advances. But the NIH are the ticket holders. They are the judge of the quality on a day-to-day basis. So it is the gold standard by which we are all judged. And while and as a university, how we're judged as well. So the NIH has been central. The National Science Foundation has been less, but as a biomedical center that does disease-based research, the NIH is really the gold standard for.
Tell us a little bit about the research you've done.
Well, I was involved in the very basics of genetic therapies, and we were working on gene therapies for heart disease when our tools were pretty basic, and I've kind of moved on to other things, cellular-based therapies for heart disease, vascular disease, other things. But it's been really interesting to see those people who are working with the tools of genetic therapies, the viruses and vectors that could use to put genetic information into cells. And now with CRISPR, that field has just taken off. You know, we're going to cure sickle cell disease. We're going to cure a number of disease, mostly from these people who stayed with it. So, and now I've become an administrator, still see some patients, but I take great pride in the research that's going on campus.
Well, and you should, because it is a remarkable story. And Dr. Safnov, you joined the School of Health Professions in 2021. Tell us a little bit about your background and what you're helping to grow in the School of Health Professions. And tell us a little bit about the School of Health Professions for a lot of folks that may be something they don't know.
So let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll segue to the school. So I had this great experience. I grew up in a family-owned orthotics and prosthetics company. So my grandfather and father made artificial limbs. My station wagon growing up was filled with fake legs. I actually thought that was normal.
Should we call the police now or later?
You know, exactly. I thought this was normal until I went to kindergarten. Like, I thought every station wagon I saw on the road had fake legs in the back, but that was just my family. So I've been exposed to healthcare and rehabilitation and that aspect of it. My parents were great. They told me to go to school, study whatever I want. Took me a while, but I essentially ended up studying movement. So I've been studying movement, since the beginning. And that segues into, rehabilitation, physical therapy, and that's really what I do as a research field. And health professions, and sometimes people miss this, health professions is 80 to 85% of the healthcare team. So if you take out the doctors, which are incredibly important, and you take out the nurses, which are incredibly important, everything else that happens is health professions. So it's the physical therapist, occupational therapist, it's how we move, it's what we eat, it's how we talk, how we hear, hearing aids, respiratory care, it's all these other fields. And lab sciences, I shouldn't forget that. Lab sciences, all the labs that we do, that's all within health professions. And then the research wrapped around that is how can we provide the evidence base for what these health professions are, the practices that they're doing.
Yeah, it's a darn big deal. You know, my CF team, we have a dietitian, a social worker, a physical therapist, and the mental health. I mean, it is such a really great team, and a lot of that does come from that School of Health Professions. So Peter, talk about a long time. 1987. Brother, you predate me. I didn't think anything predated. I thought I was like this. I was the dinosaur.
Well, yeah, that was a long time ago. But time flies when you're having fun.
And tell us a little bit about what your view of the changes. How has that happened so much?
Well, it's kind of incremental. It doesn't happen linearly. It happens in sort of a punctuated fashion. When I got here, we had half of a center. So centers are really important research drivers. They're funded by the NIH. They bring together investigators and technologies in a particular area of focus. And so we had half of one of those. The other half was in Lawrence. Over the recent years, we've gone to basically 6 of those, and with 2 more in the oven. So we've seen a lot of growth in the large research operation areas, which are the centers that are really important. I think, we've seen a lot of change, as Rob was saying before, a lot of cultural change recently, which has led to folks using a different set of values in terms of how they approach research and how they approach their activities. So that's been a major driver. I wanted to say, though, first off, that the thing that stayed the same is maybe the most important thing. So when I got here in '87, I came here from Duke, and I was impressed with the attitude. I was impressed with the fact that people were supportive, that everyone sort of, looked out for each other. And there was an attitude that, for you to succeed, I must succeed also. We work together on this. A little bit different from a private school with a lot more competition. But that sense of support and nurturing and, really working together in a collaborative fashion is something that is maintained throughout that 37-year period. So I think that's really part of KU's success, is the way we value our faculty and our staff and our trainees and how we support them.
Pretty remarkable. Tell us a little bit about your research.
Yeah, so my research has been on the nervous system. And when I was first starting out, we used to think that the nervous system was pretty constant. It didn't change very much. And over time, we realize now that it's incredibly plastic. It's very adaptive. So I've been looking at mechanisms that result in that adaptation of the nervous system in a number of systems. The female reproductive tract, looking at reproduction, wound healing, a lot of dynamic innervation changes there. After a heart attack, there are changes in the innervation of the heart that can lead to actually sudden death in some situations. So we've been trying to understand what drives those changes in the nervous system that cause it to reorganize either in an adaptive fashion or in a pathological fashion.
Yeah, that is pretty remarkable stuff. And Dr. Sosnoff, since 2021, tell us a little bit about the research you brought and what you've been doing here, and how does it benefit patients?
Sure. So, my own individual research, and just a small snippet of what's going on in the School of Health Professions. I study movement, I study walking and balance, and that led to understanding why people fall. So I deal mainly with neurological populations and older adults. And as I was doing this, I kept reading these studies that older adults or these clinical populations are falling and they're getting hurt.
Looking at us.
I know, I was going to say the exact thing. He said older adults, he looked at me, and I was like, Rob, we're coming back to that one. Okay, nice.
All right. Some older adults. So, we kept trying to prevent it, and we do a good job preventing it, but people are still falling and still getting hurt. I had this wonderful student, very well driven, and essentially we started looking at, can we teach people to fall so they don't get hurt? Stop trying to prevent the fall.
So you don't have to use the artificial limbs in that station wagon.
No,
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So
let's keep people together. So we take people and we're one of the few places in the world where we drop them on the ground. We measure how hard they hit the ground, how they hit the ground, and we try to help them so they hit the ground without getting hurt. We were doing this right now. We just finished up a study. We did it with 30 older adults at risk for injury. And I can't tell the results right now, but we really hope that we did it. And one thing that we're finding out, we're looking at different ways to prevent traumatic brain injury from falls.
I think Tua Tagliova, the quarterback from the Miami Dolphins, he had to learn how to fall.
Yep, and
because he kept getting head injuries.
This is if we have time, a great story. I was giving a community talk on falls prevention, and I asked in this, who falls and how they get hurt. And there was this older gentleman using a cane in the back, raises his hand and said, I fall 3 or 4 times a year, but I never get hurt. And I said, sir, what's your secret sauce? This is incredible. And he said, I had the privilege of jumping out of the airplane for the U.S. Army, and they taught me how to fall when I was 19 years old. Wow. And he was convinced, and again, I couldn't do a 70-year-old study to match this, but he was convinced that taught him how to fall, so that we've just been pursuing that and showing it. There's definitely ways to fall that you don't get hurt or minimize your chances of getting hurt.
And Tua played a whole year last year after he learned how to re-fall. Okay, so Dr. Samari, now you graduated, speaking of being old, from medical school in 1986. I think we may have graduated the exact same year. What do you remember about the research happening back then?
Yeah, there were small foci of very important research being done by a very small cadre of physician scientists and a larger basic scientist group. Dr. Jared Grantham was really the father of the physician scientists here.
He did amazing
He's
work.
one of the most noted scientists in our community studying polycystic kidney disease. And there were others like him, but not many. and much of the work was going on in the basic science labs. But you know, I, like many of my colleagues, got through medical schools sort of as fast as we could. I did not take the opportunity to do research. It was later in my training that I actually got my research training. So yes, it was present, and what was being done was excellent. It just wasn't very broad-based.
Yeah, that expansion has been remarkable.
Yeah.
So you might think a little bit and tell us, what does the future of research hold here on this campus?
Yeah.
And what's it going to mean to our patients?
Yeah, so you know, the community benefits so greatly from our research on campus. Number one, obviously, it's an economic driver. Every grant we get generates new jobs and new opportunities for the community, so it's an economic driver. Number two is our research brings the best and brightest physicians, physician scientists, and research teams into our community. And those physician scientists take care of patients every day and do an outstanding job. Number three is, we haven't talked about it a lot, but you know, the clinical trials that we bring, there are now 1,000 clinical trials ongoing in the health system as part of the medical center's clinical arm, and each one of those represents an opportunity for a patient to be enrolled in a new opportunity for cure or management or diagnosis. And so the clinical trials are really important. Our clinical experience in cancer and in Alzheimer's disease has really been the platforms upon which all the other aspects of research are ongoing. And you know, we have great strengths in obesity, great strengths in metabolism, a number of important areas. So Steve, it's been the rising tide. I mean, it's classic, rising tides, rising all boats.
It is
and
amazing.
I think people are, you know, the CAR T that Dr. Abdallah talked about, you know, that's just part of the cancer experience here, that, you know, that we are really on a cutting edge. And our studies in Alzheimer's disease are really unique across the country. So it's great time. And it does have such great, what's it going to be? I guess I'd ask Jake and Peter. I see larger, more grants being run here on campus that are being performed nationwide rather than us just participating.
Peter, talk to us about that. What do you see as the future there?
More clinical trials. We're involved actually in a number of studies to develop drugs, particularly in the cancer area, but also working with other groups in terms of Alzheimer's disease. So there are a number of promising therapies on the horizon. So I think it's a mixture. I think that some will be generated within our own community, but also acting as part of a larger group cohort of researchers to explore therapeutic possibilities. And then we have the All of Us initiative as well, which we're participating in, and we are sort of the site that's most focused on rural medicine. So we are attentive to the needs of the state of Kansas, and we feel that that's one of our drivers in terms of areas of research that we need to explore and develop. So I think there's a lot going on here, both in developing therapeutics, but also in understanding the basis of disease.
Okay, so Dr. Sosnoff, future research.
I think where we're going to grow, I think it's a couple of things. I think we're going to take advantage of developments in technology. I think how and where we collect data, I think we're going to segue away, or in addition to collecting in the lab and the clinic, we're going to get really good at collecting data in the real world. So majority of us are on our phones more often than not, using that as a sensor base to collect any type of health information, behavior information, and understand what people are doing in the real world. So that's what we can help them with and improve on their quality of life.
Yeah, that's good. That is great stuff.
So Steve, I just want to add something that hasn't been mentioned, but we've talked about the cultural changes over 20 years. But an important cultural change is full engagement and awareness on our health system colleagues on the importance of research by putting it in the strategic plan, by focusing on the number of clinical trials and those clinical trials that are generated here on campus. Thanks to your efforts and the efforts of health system leadership, really are the culmination of that culture over 20 years that's going to move us forward.
Thank you for that. And I like to say, clinical trials are a form of therapy.
Absolutely.
And we have to think about them like that. And 1,000 clinical trials, that's cool.
Right.
And in some of our patients, like 80% of our CF patients are involved in clinical research programs. That's crazy, right?
Yes.
But that's what moves us forward.
Absolutely.
That's just such a big deal. Well, I love this program. I want to do a lot more of this. But if you have questions, please send them to the links here on your screen through YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, email the Medical News Network. Let's check with COVID count now with Dr. Dana Hawkinson, Medical Director of Infection Prevention Control here at the Health System. Doc Hawk.
Yeah. Hi.
Is COVID dead, dude?
It is not dead. It unfortunately is still circulating out there, but it is much better than it has been. The last couple weeks, including this week, we've had 12 active infections, so I'm believing we are pushing down towards those single digits again. For the most part, people go about their daily lives, it really doesn't affect them, but we do have to remember and be sensitive to the fact that there are populations in our community and in our nation that can be significantly affected, and that's why we always do promote having a plan. If you do have symptoms, test early. If you're testing at home, you may have to test 2 or 3 days in a row. Talk with your physician. If you are at high risk for severe disease, try to get on that oral antivirals if you can as well. And of course, be up to date with your vaccines.
Hawk, for the third week in a row, we've had more influenza admissions than COVID admissions.
Yeah.
So that feels a little more familiar to me of how this part of the season usually runs.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about that. We were happy in the fact that COVID wasn't having the impact that it had the previous few years. But again, there are still too many admissions for influenza. We would like to say that, these are the graphs showing that. There on the far right of that graph, it does show our COVID admission is not accurate from the numbers that we just gave last week. That was an administrative and a computer issue. But the influenza and the RSV numbers are accurate, and we would say that you can see there that they have been higher than the COVID admissions. And nationally what they're seeing is that overall it does remain decreasing as far as people going to outpatient facilities to be evaluated. But within the last week, they've seen a slight increase in the number of clinical labs that have had positive influenza samples, and for the most part as well, influenza A and influenza B seem to be identified in the same proportions. Earlier on in the season, we had the vast majority of influenza A. So we are seeing, kind of like you said in the previous comments, we are seeing kind of that shift towards influenza B. That can be typical some years where we see an initial surge with influenza A and then later in the season with influenza B. That's what we're seeing right now. But influenza activity is still fairly high, and of course we know people are on spring break or have just completed or will be going, so it is very important to stay protected during that time.
And hey, one study, just to hit on real quick, there was a study that came out about the bivalent vaccine safety concerns around ischemic stroke for those aged 65 and over. It came out in JAMA on Tuesday. I think it looked pretty good, though.
Yeah, we do try to endorse. We know there is so much misinformation going out there, especially about medical issues, especially regarding vaccination and including COVID vaccination. Now, we would say that this was a study done on a particular population, and that population was patients over 65 who are Medicare patients. So that's what the subpopulation that they looked at. But it did look like the vaccines were safe. And so we want to keep showing people that data as well to understand that the vaccines are safe, but also effective.
Good news, I think, on all those fronts. All right, we know many of you may have some questions. Let's head to Studio B with Alexa Stell Sid.
Good morning. We have a great question from Stu. Stu wants to know if you're competing with other academic centers, or are you doing these studies in cooperation with other academic centers?
Great question.
It's a great question, and the answer is yes. We are competing with them to get funding, but many of our grants are cooperative. A great cooperative example is the one that Peter mentioned, which is the All of Us study, which is led by Executive Dean Ojo, which leads a 4-state grant based here in Kansas City to do the genotype for up to 1 million people across the country. And Dean Ojo funded the study recently with a focus on rural populations. So stay tuned. I hope you'll have Ojo on sometime as part of the.
I think he may have been on. I think we've been
has
talking
he already
about,
been on?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're going to talk about it some more.
Good.
This is a big deal.
So the answer is we do compete, and we are cooperative as part of those competitions as well.
Mary McBain would like to know if you've done any research on traumatic brain injuries.
So if I can answer. So there's a group of folks that do focus on the care and rehabilitation of individuals with traumatic brain injury. I personally have looked at mild traumatic brain injury, concussion risk. So the answer is yes, but there's a pocket of researchers interested in focusing on traumatic brain injury on campus.
The information and the therapy for traumatic brain injury has improved over the last 10 years, and really it's a good story, although TBI is a tough story.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have really good tools to use now.
Janet wants to know if it's true that many published studies can't be replicated, and if so, is that a problem?
Peter, Rob, what do you
Peter,
think?
you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. Yeah, there clearly are some studies where things are not replicated, and there can be a lot of reasons for that. There are a lot of variables that go into an experiment, and so if you're doing an experiment on animals, for example, the conditions in which they're housed, the health status of the animals can be variables that are hard to control for. We and many other institutions are focusing on reproducibility and validity of studies. We actually have courses that we teach our students in terms of how to replicate and make sure that the studies that they're doing are valid. But it's science is a complicated area, and so the fact that people don't get the exact same results all the time is perhaps not surprising, but there has to be greater emphasis on making sure that studies are reproducible.
Marcia has a question. This was talked about earlier in the program, and she wants to know, how do you learn how to fall so you don't get hurt?
Because some of us are pretty clumsy. I'm just going to say, I'm not going to talk about Rob, but I'm talking about myself.
You know, it's I don't know if I can answer that really quickly, but the best thing to do is when you hit the ground, roll, so you minimize the forces acting on you, and then lower the height of the fall if you can. There's various techniques, and I probably need the whole episode to go over how to do it. So,
Okay, that's the invitation to come back.
It sounds like what we learned in grade school: stop, drop, and roll.
yeah, it's very similar.
Mary Kay has a really good question. This is for anyone who likes drinking wine. Mary Kay wants to know, how do I find out who funds any given study? For example, the studies that showed drinking wine is good for my heart. Yeah. How can I tell if the wine industry paid for it?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and it really comes down to many of the things we learn about nutrition, or in this case, wine drinking, are often funded through industries that are supported by the wine industry. So it can be really.
You can tell me potato chips are not good for you.
I'm going to tell you that the potato chip industry is lobbying. But yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of the data on drinking and diet have been driven by industries. I think now we think there may be safe levels of drinking, but there's probably not an advantage. That is becoming more and more clear if you take out the data that's been purported by the alcohol industry. And the same for the sugar industry, which drove us, away from fats and to sugars. That was probably not right either. So yes, trying to find out who's funding the study is critical. And there's been tobacco money involved in research as well.
For research, cigarettes are really safe and good for you,
right?
Or not. Okay, so politics and research, does that kind of run into each other a little?
Yeah, unfortunately, it touches us every step of the way. Thankfully, for the last 15 to 20 years, support of the NIH has been a bipartisan goal of Congress. And so legislators on both sides of the aisle have been very supportive. Senator Moran has been an incredible supporter of NIH, and we have greatly benefited from that. Recently, and including looking at this year, funding for the NIH is going to be down, but that's probably because overall discretionary funding is going to be limited. So we have been supported by both sides of the aisle. Occasionally, we do get caught up in some political turmoil regarding a study or two, but in general, we've been supported on both sides.
People want to get better, which is kind of a driver for all of us.
Yeah.
And so, the last question. As you look at that steep curve, I mean, that's an incredible curve on how much, not only the number of grants, but the amount of money that we're being. Is there any place in the country that's like that?
Well,
right now?
you know, Peter and I have looked very carefully at that. So number one, while funding for the NIH has gone up, it's not gone up at that rate. We are at 12%, and the NIH has gone up at 3 to 4%. So we are outkicking our coverage there. Peter and I have looked very closely at other centers that have had those trajectories, and many times they are involving a single grant or single process that's moved them forward. During COVID, for instance, there were centers that got the large COVID grants, and they went up very high. I would say, Peter, maybe you could comment, we're probably in a handful of centers that are growing at that rate, and you know, we're concerned that the constraints of time and space and everything that goes with it. But Peter, what do you? How many similar centers do you think there are in the country?
And I haven't done the deep dive analysis, Rob, but we are definitely at the top of that group, at least in the last 3 years.
Yeah, a rate of rise, yeah.
The rate
of rise, and yeah, and in that big increase, we saw a $24 million increase last year, and to Rob's point of large grants, only one was a one-time grant for $8 million. So most of that increase is organic, which means it'll be maintained going forward. So I think we are, you know, we've seen, we're competing with the big dogs now. The curve gets a lot steeper where we are now, so it's harder to make additional advances. But we are one of a very few number of institutions that are seeing this level of growth.
You know what I say to that? Rock, shock, J-R-K-U. All right, this has been a great discussion. I am grateful to our guests for being here, and it indeed is a day to say Rock, Shock, Jayhawk, KU. That's pretty awesome stuff. Let's get final thoughts before we go. Dr. Sosnoff.
Research is important to help patients. That's my final thought.
And indeed it is. I've got a couple stories I can tell about that. Dr. Peter Smith.
Yeah, KU has been a fantastic, KU Medical Center, KU Med, has been a fantastic place to be. There's always been additional opportunity. The growth has been fantastic. The support has been phenomenal. We are doing great things for the state of Kansas and for the nation, and I'm proud to be part of that program.
Yeah, it's a big opportunity. Dr. Samari.
Get your brackets in. You've got 24 hours. You know, I've been saying this is the golden age of 39th and Rainbow.
It is.
You know, I think we could go back maybe 60 years and start, you know, piecing this out. But I just think this is the golden age. It's represented by you and the show. It's represented by the data that we saw. And it's been a really exciting time to be here. We look forward to a very exciting future.
You know, it is. It's the greatest day right here. Doc Hawk.
Yeah, I would agree. Research is important. Even more important, going along with that, is the transparency. And that was a very good question about funding. It is always important to understand where funding comes from. We do promote research. We promote the transparency within research. And not only during those studies, but even things after studies, especially for drugs or vaccines that come out. So we'll continue to be transparent and promote those things and let you, the viewer, know and understand that as well, and always welcome those kinds of questions.
You know, I'm always reminded how important it is in research by loss. When you lose one of your patients at an early age, when you watch them suffer and people have a struggle to get by. When I started in CF, the average survival in 1990 was around 17 years. And today, a patient born, which the majority of patients in CF have this defect of a delta F508 with Trikafta, may have a normal life expectancy. That didn't happen accidentally. That happened because of the efforts of many, many folks. And it's research that changes lives so dramatically so you go from an early death to retirement. That is the power of academic medicine. And that's the power of faith, hope, and science. We'll be back next week.
Before he even turned 50, Doug Lewis faced 2 major medical emergencies. I'm Alexis Del Cid. On the next All Things Heart, the unlikely hero he credits for saving his life. Here's a hint. She is much too small for scrubs.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now everywhere podcasts are available.